On a grey morning in modern Istanbul, tourists gather along the ancient land walls, snapping photos and reading plaques that summarise more than 1,000 years of history in a few neat sentences. Most of them don't realise that beneath their feet, in the soil and stone, lie fragments of one of the most decisive days in human history. A day when cannons thundered against these walls, when priests marched through the streets holding icons high, when an emperor put aside his crown and chose to die as a common soldier. A day when an empire that called itself Roman, born in the age of emperors and gladiators, finally fell. What happened here in 1453 did more than end a city. It ended an era. This is the story of the Fall of Constantinople, and the day the Middle Ages died. To understand how this city fell, we need to go back to the early months of 1453. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had been the beating heart of the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine Empire. It had survived sieges, plagues, crusades, and civil wars. Its walls had held against Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and Latin crusaders. But by the 15th century, the empire behind those walls was little more than a memory. Once the Byzantine Empire stretched across the Mediterranean. Now it was reduced to a few scattered territories and this one city, clinging to life at the edge of Europe and Asia. On the throne sat Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, proud, stubborn, fully aware that he might be the last emperor to wear the Roman crown. Surrounding him was a rising power, the Ottoman Empire. For decades, the Ottomans had been tightening a noose around the city, conquering its neighbours, cutting its trade, and slowly isolating it from the rest of Christendom. In 1451, a new sultan came to power, Mehmed II. He was only 19. But what he lacked in age, he made up for in ambition. Mehmed didn't just want Constantinople for strategic reasons, he wanted it for what it meant. To conquer the city that called itself the New Rome was to claim the legacy of Rome itself. It meant transforming the Ottomans from a regional power into an empire that would stand at the centre of the known world, and he was willing to do whatever it took. The preparations began long before the first cannon fired. Mehmed ordered the construction of a massive fortress on the Bosporus, Rumeli Hisar, just north of the city. From there, Manade from Afpametithkrus, his troops could control the sea traffic into Constantinople and choke off supplies and reinforcements. The message was clear: no ship would pass without the Sultan's permission. Inside the city, Constantine XI watched these preparations with growing dread. He sent letters to the kings and princes of Europe, begging for help. Some promised prayers. A few sent small groups of soldiers, but no great army ever came. By the spring of 1453, everything was in place. Mehmed's army, somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 men, began to assemble outside the walls. Among them were Janissaries, elite infantry trained from childhood to be the Sultan's loyal soldiers. There were engineers, siege specialists, artillery crews, and there was something else. A new weapon cast in bronze by a Hungarian cannon founder named Orban. A cannon so large it took dozens of oxen to move it. So powerful it could hurl stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds into the city's walls. For centuries, the Theodosian walls had been considered unbreakable. Now, for the first time, something existed that might change that. Inside the city, the mood was grim but resolute. Constantine XI had at most 7,000 defenders. That number included not just professional soldiers, but also volunteers, sailors, and a few thousand foreign allies, Venetians, Genoese, and other European mercenaries who had come to fight for faith, honour, or money. They faced an army 10 times their size, and yet they had two major advantages. First, the walls themselves. 3 layers of stone and brick, a moat, dozens of towers. These fortifications had stopped armies before. Second, the spirit of a city that had survived 1,000 years. For many of its defenders, this was more than a battle for territory. It was a battle for the last surviving piece of the Roman world. On April 6th, 1453, the siege began. The first sound was not the clash of steel, but the roar of artillery. Mehmed's great cannon, along with smaller guns lined up beside it, opened fire on the walls. The thunder of gunpowder echoed across the fields and over the sea, a sound that belonged to a new age of warfare. Stone balls smashed into towers and curtain walls, sending clouds of dust and shattered masonry into the air. Sections of the outer wall buckled and crumbled, but the defenders refused to yield. As soon as the bombardment ceased for the night, Byzantine and Latin soldiers rushed to repair the damage. They dragged stones into place, rebuilt sections with wood and earth, and filled gaps with whatever they could find. By morning, when the cannons opened fire again, many of the breaches were already patched. Day after day, this deadly rhythm continued. Cannon fire by daylight, frantic repairs by night. The siege was no longer about swords and ladders alone. It had become a race between destruction and repair, between old stone and new gunpowder. Constantinople wasn't just a city of walls, it was a city of water. To its north lay the Golden Horn, a natural harbour that had helped make the city rich. To protect it from attack, the Byzantines employed one of their oldest defences, a massive iron chain stretched across the mouth of the harbour. As long as that chain held, enemy ships could not enter the Golden Horn. The Ottoman fleet was trapped outside, forced to remain in the open waters of the Bosporus and the Sea of Marmara. Mehmed knew the chain had to be bypassed, but attacking it directly was suicidal. So he chose a solution that seemed impossible. If he couldn't take his ships through the water, he would take them overland. One night, under cover of darkness, Ottoman engineers and soldiers began a staggering operation. They laid wooden planks greased with animal fat across hills and ravines behind the city. Then, using oxen, ropes, and sheer manpower, they began hauling dozens of ships out of the water and dragging them over the hills. The sight must have been surreal. War galleys, designed to slice through waves, now sliding on wood and grease across solid ground. By morning, the people of Constantinople woke up to a nightmare. Ottoman ships that had been bottled up outside the chain, were now floating calmly inside the Golden Horn, behind their defences. Mehmed had turned the city's own geography against it. Now the defenders were under threat from multiple sides, both the land walls to the west and the harbour walls facing the Horn. The noose tightened further. As the weeks went on, the conditions inside the city grew worse. Food supplies dwindled. Exhaustion set in. Every day brought new bombardments, new attacks, new rumours. Some citizens believed a miracle would save them. Prophecies circulated, claiming that when the city was about to fall, an angel would descend, hand a humble man a sword, and drive the invaders away. Others were less hopeful. Processions wound through the streets, with priests carrying icons and relics, chanting prayers and pleading for divine protection. In the great church of Hagia Sophia, crowds gathered beneath the vast dome, their voices rising up in a desperate chorus. Outside, the cannons continued their work. Stone by stone, crack by crack, the medieval world creaked under the weight of gunpowder and iron. By late May, the end was nearing. The walls were badly damaged, the defenders were exhausted. No relief army had appeared on the horizon. Mehmed decided it was time for a final, all-out assault. He ordered his troops to prepare. Prayers were said in the Ottoman camps. Drums beat rhythmically into the night. Inside the city, the mood was sombre. On the evening of May 28th, the people of Constantinople gathered one last time in Hagia Sophia. Latins and Greeks, soldiers and civilians, nobles and commoners, many of whom had hated or distrusted each other for years, now stood side by side. Emperor Constantine XI was there among them, a man who knew with near certainty that he would not live to see another dawn. For one final night, the city that had endured for a millennium prayed together. Outside, under the stars, the armies of a new empire waited. In the early hours of May 29th, 1453, the attack began. The darkness was shattered by the sound of drums, horns, and shouted commands. Ottoman troops surged toward the damaged sections of the land walls, particularly near the gate of St. Romanus, where the bombardments had done the most damage. Mehmed's strategy came in waves. First, he sent in irregular troops, poorly trained but numerous. Their job was to exhaust the defenders, to draw arrows and bolts, to identify weak points. They were driven back with heavy losses. Then more disciplined Anatolian troops attacked. Again the defenders managed to hold, hurling down stones, firing arrows, and fighting hand to hand in the breaches. But the defenders were tiring. Their numbers were few. Their strength was nearly gone. Finally, Mehmed unleashed his elite, the Janissaries. Heartened by the promise of glory and reward, they advanced in tight formations, climbing over the bodies of those who had fallen before them. At the walls, chaos erupted. A key defensive position, a small postern gate known as the Kerkeporta, may have been left open or was overwhelmed in the confusion. Ottoman soldiers poured through, raising their banners on the inner walls. For the defenders, it was a devastating sight. Once the enemy was inside the city's defences, even in small numbers, panic spread quickly. Emperor Constantine XI refused to flee. Casting aside the imperial purple, he fought in the thick of the battle as a common soldier. According to later accounts, his last words were a bitter acknowledgement of defeat and duty. Surrounded by enemies, he vanished in the crush of bodies, never to be definitively identified. The last Roman emperor died with a sword in his hand, defending his city. By mid-morning, organised resistance had collapsed. Ottoman banners flew over the walls. The gate was opened. The city was taken. After more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had fallen. When Mehmed II entered the city, he did not see ruins of a dying empire. He saw the capital of his future. He made his way to Hagia Sophia, the great church that had symbolized Christian Constantinople for nearly a millennium. There, he ordered it converted into a mosque. It was a powerful symbol, the spiritual heart of the old empire now beating for a new one. Christian Europe reacted with shock and horror. The Queen of Cities had fallen. The last great bastion of Eastern Christendom was gone. But history rarely moves in just one direction. As refugees and scholars fled westward, they carried with them manuscripts, knowledge, and ideas. These would help fuel the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and classical learning in Western Europe. The fall of Constantinople slammed one door shut and quietly opened another. The fall of Constantinople wasn't just a military victory or a political shift. It was a turning point in how wars were fought, how empires rose and fell, and how the world saw itself. Gunpowder had proved superior to stone. Cannons had brought down the symbol of an entire age. For centuries, medieval Europe had looked to Constantinople as a bulwark, a relic of Rome, and a spiritual centre. On May 29th, 1453, that world ended. In its place stood something new, an Ottoman Empire that straddled continents, and a Europe that would need to redefine itself without its ancient Eastern counterpart. Today the walls of Istanbul still stand in many places, damaged, repaired, weathered by time. Thousands of cars pass through gates that once saw emperors and sultans ride beneath their arches. Most people walking along those stones will never hear the cannon fire or the shouts in Greek, Latin, and Turkish. They will never see the last emperor vanish into the dust of battle or the first Ottoman banners rise over the city. But on that day in 1453, everything changed. An empire that began with Constantine the Great ended with Constantine XI. The medieval world gave way, piece by piece, to the modern one. And on these walls, under these skies, the Middle Ages died. That's it for today's video, but I want to know what you think. Which part surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.